The jungle on Guadalcanal doesn't just sweat, it breathes. And for days it's been breathing death. We've been pinned down, unable to move, by ghosts in the canopy. You never see them, but you hear their work. 11 of them, the whispers say. 11 masters of the trees turning this island into our tomb. Then an officer shows up. He's not carrying an M1 Garand like the rest of us. He's holding a polished wooden rifle, something you'd see in a sporting goods catalog. They say he's some kind of champion shooter. But this isn't a competition. This is a slaughter. By January of 1943, the island of Guadalcanal had become a festering wound for both the American and Japanese forces. For the recently arrived men of the 132nd Infantry Regiment, it was an education in a new, more personal form of warfare. The battlefield wasn't a series of neat lines on a map. It was a three-dimensional hell of suffocating humidity, tangled vegetation, and an enemy who seemed to be part of the very air. Near the strategic Point Cruz sector, along the banks of the Matanikau River, the American advance had not just slowed, it had completely stalled. The cause was not a heavily fortified position or a massed banzai charge. The entire regiment, thousands of men, was being held hostage by a phantom menace. The paralysis gripping the unit was the work of just 11 Japanese snipers. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were masters of their craft, blending into the dense jungle canopy with almost supernatural skill. They were patient, disciplined, and utterly lethal. They didn't fire indiscriminately. Instead, they selected their targets with the cold precision of a surgeon, targeting leaders, communication specialists, and medics to maximize confusion and fear. Each sharp crack of their scoped Arisaka rifles was a punctuation mark in a growing story of American casualties. For the GIs pinned in their foxholes, the psychological strain was unbearable. The enemy was an unseen, unheard force that dealt death from the treetops. Every shadow, every rustling leaf became a source of terror. Standard American tactics proved useless against this threat. The M1 Garand, a magnificent rifle designed for delivering rapid, semi-automatic fire, was the wrong tool for the job. Frustrated soldiers would unleash a full clip into a suspected tree, the loud report only serving to advertise their own position to a dozen other unseen eyes. Calling in mortar fire was like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer, a wasteful, noisy exercise that rarely found its mark. The American war machine, built for overwhelming force, was being surgically dismantled by a handful of skilled marksmen. It was into this desperate situation that Second Lieutenant John George entered the picture. George was different. In civilian life, he wasn't just a shooter. He was a champion marksman, a man who understood the complex ballet of windage, elevation, and trigger control. He was an expert in a field the Army had largely neglected, and he had come to war with his own equipment. His personal weapon was a Winchester Model 70, a bolt-action rifle renowned in the sporting world for its accuracy. Atop it sat a modest 2.5-power Lyman Alaskan scope. To the hardened veterans, his polished rifle looked absurdly out of place, a mail-order toy in a landscape of Parkerized steel and military-grade utility. But George's commander, a Colonel Ferry, was a man desperate for a solution. Seeing the failure of conventional methods, he looked at George and his civilian rifle, not with scorn, but with a glimmer of hope. He gave the lieutenant a mission that was as direct as it was daunting. Take that rifle, go into that jungle, and hunt the hunters. The institutional might of the U.S. Army had failed. Now it would come down to one man, his unconventional weapon, and a deadly game of patience and skill. For Lieutenant John George, stepping into the jungle on January 22nd, 1943, was like crossing a threshold into another world. Behind him were the familiar sounds of an army at war, the shouting of orders, the clatter of equipment, the distant rhythmic thud of mortars. Ahead there was only a profound and menacing silence. He was a lone operative in a conflict defined by mass formations. His mission required a completely different skill set, one that had been honed not on military firing ranges, but in the quiet, competitive world of civilian marksmanship. He understood that this was not about speed or volume of fire. It would be a contest of patience, observation, and an almost Zen-like control over mind and body. The enemy he hunted was not just a soldier with a rifle. He was a master of the environment. The Japanese snipers had spent weeks turning this patch of jungle into an intricate fortress. They tied themselves into the highest branches of the banyan trees, using the dense foliage as both concealment and armor. From these perches, they had a commanding view of the American lines, able to observe movement and pick targets with impunity. Their fieldcraft was exceptional. They understood the play of light and shadow, the natural sounds of the jungle, and how to use both to their advantage. To find such a man required George to unlearn the instincts of a regular infantryman. Instead of moving from cover to cover, he learned to become cover. He moved with agonizing slowness, sometimes taking an hour to cross a distance another soldier might cover in a minute. Every step was deliberate, placed carefully to avoid snapping a twig or rustling a leaf. His eyes were his primary weapon, constantly scanning, not for a human figure, but for an inconsistency, a patch of bark that seemed too dark, a shadow that didn't move with the wind, the subtle, almost imperceptible glint of a rifle scope. In this deadly game, the Japanese held the initial advantage. They were stationary, hidden, and waiting. They knew George or someone like him would be sent to hunt them. They prepared for it. One of their most effective tactics was the use of decoys. A helmet might be placed on a branch, or a dummy rifle propped in a visible position, designed to draw fire from an impatient American hunter. Firing on such a target was a fatal mistake. The muzzle flash would instantly betray the hunter's position, and a precise shot from the real sniper, hidden 50 yards away, would be the immediate result. George's discipline as a competitive shooter served him well. He refused to be rushed. When he spotted what seemed to be a target, he would remain motionless, sometimes for hours, simply observing. He knew his opponents were just as patient as he was. It was a battle of wills, fought in silence. During the first day, he identified several likely sniper hides, but took no shots. He was gathering intelligence, mapping out their network, and learning their patterns. He was thinking not just about the one sniper in front of him, but about the 10 others who might be watching. He had to be certain that when he finally pulled the trigger on his Winchester, the single, sharp report wouldn't be his own death sentence. He was dismantling their advantage, piece by piece, not with bullets, but with his mind. The hunt had begun, and the jungle held its breath. The stalemate broke on the second day. After hours of patient observation, lying motionless in the humid undergrowth, George detected it. It wasn't a man or a rifle, but a subtle, unnatural movement high in a banyan tree. A vine seemed to twitch against the rhythm of the gentle breeze. His 2.5 power scope, though low-powered by modern standards, was crystal clear. Focusing on the anomaly, he traced the vine upwards into a dense clump of leaves, and there, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a small section of a canvas harness and the dark outline of a boot sole. The sniper was tied to the trunk, a living part of the tree. George had his first target. He knew firing immediately would be reckless, The sniper was well covered, and a shot that only wounded him would unleash a hail of fire from the other 10. He had to wait for the perfect moment. For another hour, he didn't move a muscle, the crosshairs of his scope resting on the concealed position. He regulated his breathing, slowed his heart rate, and entered the focused state of a competition shooter. The world narrowed to the circle of light in his scope. Finally, the moment came. The Japanese sniper shifted his weight, perhaps to relieve a cramped muscle, and for a fleeting second, a portion of his torso became visible through a gap in the leaves. George didn't hesitate. He had already calculated the range, the slight upward angle, the potential deflection from a stray leaf. The trigger squeeze was slow, deliberate, a conscious act of will. George knew he had mere seconds before his position was bracketed by return fire. He didn't wait to confirm his kill. The moment his rifle recoiled, he was already moving, slithering backwards into deeper cover, not with speed, but with a silent, methodical urgency. He put 50 yards of dense jungle between himself and his firing position, before pausing to listen. The expected volley of retaliatory fire never came. Instead, an unnerving silence descended upon the jungle. This was a new tactic. The remaining snipers were not going to waste ammunition or reveal their own positions by firing wildly. They were intelligent, disciplined opponents. They were now actively hunting him, just as he was hunting them. The psychological dynamic had shifted. Before, the Americans were the prey. Now one of the prey was fighting back, and the hunters had to be wary. For the GIs hunkered down in their foxholes, the sound of that single, powerful shot followed by the cessation of fire from one of their tormentors was a revelation. It was a sign that the ghosts in the trees were mortal after all. They didn't know who had fired or how, but it was the first glimmer of hope they had felt in days. Lieutenant George, now hidden in a new position, methodically chambered another round. He knew the remaining 10 snipers would be on high alert, their eyes scanning the jungle for any sign of the American hunter. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. 1 down, 10 to go. Over the next 48 hours, the jungle around Point Cruz became a silent, deadly chessboard. The conflict was no longer between 2 armies, but between 10 individuals on one side and a single man on the other. John George had to evolve his tactics with each encounter. Having revealed his presence with the first kill, he knew the enemy would be adapting, searching for the signature of his Winchester rifle. He abandoned any notion of a fixed position, becoming a ghost himself, constantly on the move, but in a way that was nearly imperceptible. His process was a grueling cycle of immense patience punctuated by moments of absolute precision. He would spend hours inching his way to a vantage point that offered a good view of a suspected sniper hide. Once in position, he would remain utterly still, sometimes for half a day, letting the jungle's natural rhythms return to normal around him. He fought off thirst, hunger, and the constant torment of insects, knowing that the slightest uncontrolled movement could betray him. His superior marksmanship was only one part of his success. His true genius lay in his ability to think like his opponents. He began to anticipate their tricks. He learned to distinguish the subtle shimmer of a real rifle scope from the duller reflection of a piece of glass planted as a decoy. He recognized that a perfectly still bird in a tree was often a sign of a human presence nearby that had startled it into silence. He used these small environmental clues to build a mental map of the sniper's network. On the 3rd day, he encountered their most cunning trap. He spotted what appeared to be a perfectly concealed sniper's nest. But something felt wrong. It was too obvious, almost as if it were designed to be found. Trusting his instinct, he spent hours observing the position from a flank angle instead of head-on. His patience was rewarded. He eventually spotted the real sniper, hidden in a separate tree 75 yards away, with a clear line of sight to the decoy. The trap was simple. An American hunter spots the fake nest, takes aim, and is immediately eliminated by the real marksman. George, however, had turned the tables. He was now the observer of the observer. Carefully, quietly, he brought the crosshairs of his Lyman Alaskan scope to bear on the real threat. The shot was more difficult this time, angled through thick branches, but his aim was true. The second sniper fell, his own trap having become his undoing. With each successful kill, George's legend grew among the men of the 132nd Infantry. The whispers changed from doubt about his mail-order rifle to awe. The invisible terror that had held them captive was being systematically dismantled, one precise shot at a time. For the Japanese snipers, the experience was profoundly unnerving. They were the hunters, the apex predators of this jungle. But now they were being stalked by something they couldn't see. Their comrades were vanishing from their perches, picked off by a single phantom rifleman. Their confidence began to erode, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. They were forced to question every shadow, second-guess their own fieldcraft. The psychological pressure that they had expertly applied to the American forces was now being reflected back at them with terrifying efficiency. The hunter had become the hunted. George pressed his advantage, working relentlessly, forgoing sleep and rest. He knew he had a limited window before the remaining snipers either relocated or devised a counter-strategy he couldn't predict. He was in a race against time, a solitary warrior chipping away at an invisible fortress. By the end of the fourth day, the ordeal was over. Lieutenant John George had systematically hunted and eliminated all 11 Japanese snipers who had held the 132nd Infantry Regiment in a state of paralysis. He had accomplished this feat alone, using a personally owned sporting rifle in a master class of fieldcraft and marksmanship that left his fellow soldiers and commanders in stunned admiration. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate and profound. For the American GIs, it was as if a suffocating weight had been lifted. The trees were no longer objects of terror. The advance could resume. A single man had broken the stalemate that an entire regiment could not. The mockery that had once been directed at George's Winchester Model 70 was replaced by a deep, almost mythic reverence for both the rifle and the man who wielded it. The event marked a crucial turning point in the American military's understanding of warfare. Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander who had placed his faith in George, saw the larger lesson. He realized that the brute force of industrial warfare had a critical vulnerability. The M1 Garand was a weapon for infantrymen, but there was a distinct and vital role for the specialist, the trained marksman who could operate with surgical precision. The success of one man with the right tool and the right skills had saved countless lives and accomplished a strategic objective that mortars and massed rifle fire had failed to achieve. Acting on this realization, Colonel Ferry gave George a new and even more important mission. He was to create the regiment's first formal sniper section. He was no longer just a hunter. He was to become a teacher. George was authorized to handpick the best marksmen from the ranks, soldiers who displayed the same unique combination of patience, keen eyesight, and steady nerves that he possessed. The problem was equipment. There were no more Winchester Model 70s available in the middle of the jungle. The solution, however, was waiting in crates left behind by the Marines who had previously fought over this same ground. The Marines had a more established appreciation for marksmanship and had brought with them a number of Springfield rifles, the Army's older, bolt-action workhorse. Crucially, some of these Springfields were equipped with high-quality, 8-power unertl scopes, far more powerful than George's own optic. Suddenly, George had the tools he needed. He established a makeshift training program right there in the combat zone. He taught his hand-picked students the arts of camouflage, stalking, and long-range estimation. He drilled them in the painstaking discipline of observation, showing them how to read the subtle language of the jungle. He passed on the hard-won lessons from his 4-day duel, explaining the enemy's use of decoys and the importance of choosing a firing position with a secure escape route. He was creating a new breed of soldier for the U.S. Army, forging a specialized weapon from the raw material of ordinary infantrymen. The establishment of this small sniper section was a quiet revolution. It was a formal acknowledgement that the age of the individual marksman had not been rendered obsolete by modern, semi-automatic warfare. On the contrary, in the dense, claustrophobic terrain of the Pacific, the sniper was more essential than ever. John George, the civilian champion, had not only defeated the enemy, but had also fundamentally changed the tactical doctrine of the U.S. Army in the field. After the hard-won victory on Guadalcanal, the currents of the war carried John George to a new and even more unforgiving theater of operations. In February of 1944, he found himself attached to one of the most legendary units of the Second World War, the 5,300th 7th Composite Unit, better known to history as Merrill's Marauders. Their mission was a daunting one, a deep penetration operation behind Japanese lines in the dense, mountainous jungles of Burma. They were to disrupt enemy supply lines and communications to pave the way for the capture of the vital Myitkyina airfield. George arrived in this new battlefield with his trusted Winchester Model 70, the rifle that had made him a legend on Guadalcanal. He assumed that the skills which had served him so well there would be directly transferable to this new campaign. However, he was about to receive a stark lesson in the complexities of jungle warfare. The tactical environment in Burma was profoundly different from what he had experienced on Guadalcanal. While Guadalcanal had involved a relatively static front, with extended periods of patient observation, the campaign in Burma was a war of constant movement and ambush. The Marauders were always on the offensive, marching for miles through grueling terrain, and engagements were often sudden, violent, and at extremely close quarters. In this new context, George's specialized equipment and methods began to show their limitations. His Winchester, a masterpiece of long-range precision, was a bolt-action rifle. This meant that after every shot he had to manually work the bolt to eject the spent casing and chamber a new round. While this was of no consequence in a patient duel with a distant, static target, it was a significant disadvantage in a sudden firefight against multiple enemies at a range of 30 or 40 yards. The rapid, semi-automatic fire of the M1 Garand, which had been less useful against the snipers of Guadalcanal, was now the king of the battlefield. Furthermore, his 2.5-power Lyman Alaskan scope, perfect for identifying a camouflaged enemy from 200 yards away, was a liability in a close-range ambush. When an enemy soldier burst from the undergrowth just a few paces away, the magnification was disorienting, and the narrow field of view made it difficult to acquire the target quickly. More often than not, he found himself relying on the rifle's iron sights, effectively negating the very feature that made his weapon system unique. It was a humbling experience for the master marksman. He learned that tactics and equipment are not universal truths. They are answers to specific tactical problems. The solution for one battlefield could be the problem on another. In Burma, the primary threats were not lone, expert snipers in static positions, but machine gun nests hidden around a bend in the trail, or squads of infantrymen launching surprise attacks. Here, the premium was on firepower, speed, and the ability to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. George's role shifted. He was still a valued marksman, but his opportunities to apply his unique skills were few and far between. His experience became a powerful lesson in adaptability. He came to appreciate the M1 Garand in a way he hadn't before, recognizing its genius as a general-purpose infantry weapon designed for the chaotic reality of most combat engagements. His time with Merrill's Marauders added a crucial new layer to his understanding of warfare. He had mastered the art of the patient hunt, and now he was learning the brutal science of the close-quarters brawl. When the guns of the Second World War finally fell silent, John George returned to a world eager to forget the conflict. But George knew that the lessons forged in the brutal jungles of Guadalcanal and Burma were too valuable to be lost to history. Many soldiers sought to leave their wartime experiences behind them, locking them away in the quiet corners of their minds. George, however, felt a profound duty to document what he had learned. He was not just a soldier, he was a technician, a student of the science of small arms and tactics. He had witnessed firsthand the critical gap between official military doctrine and the bloody realities of combat. He had seen how the right tool in the right hands could change the course of a battle, and how the wrong tool could be a fatal liability. This conviction led him to undertake a new mission, one fought not with a rifle, but with a typewriter. In 1947, he published his seminal work, Shots Fired in Anger. The book was unlike any other memoir to emerge from the war. It was not a romanticized account of heroism or a sweeping strategic overview. Instead, it was a deeply personal and incredibly detailed technical analysis of jungle warfare from the perspective of the individual rifleman. He dedicated entire chapters to the practical strengths and weaknesses of the weapons used by both American and Japanese forces. He wrote with the dispassionate eye of an engineer about the M1 Garand, praising its reliability and firepower, but noting its heavy weight and the telltale ping of its ejected en-bloc clip, which could signal an empty rifle to a nearby enemy. He gave a thorough, respectful analysis of the Japanese Arisaka rifle, acknowledging its accuracy and reliability while critiquing its excessive length for close-quarters fighting. Of course, he also detailed the performance of his own Winchester Model 70, explaining precisely why its accuracy and the clarity of its scope made it the perfect instrument for the specific challenges he faced on Guadalcanal. But the book was more than a simple catalog of firearms. George delved into the tactics he had developed, the hard-won knowledge of camouflage, movement, and observation. He recounted the psychological chess match with the Japanese snipers, detailing his methods of detecting their hides and avoiding their traps. He was, in effect, writing the field manual that the Army had never given him. He explained the crucial differences between the static warfare of Guadalcanal and the mobile, ambush-heavy combat of the Burma campaign, providing a nuanced understanding of how terrain dictates tactics. Shots Fired in Anger quickly became a classic, an essential text for professional soldiers, firearms enthusiasts, and military historians. It was a bridge between the theoretical world of ordnance departments and the life-or-death reality of the front line. Through his clear, precise prose, George preserved a wealth of practical knowledge that would otherwise have vanished with the veterans who held it. He ensured that the lessons paid for in blood would not have to be relearned by a future generation of soldiers. His book was his final and perhaps most enduring contribution to the art of warfare. John George lived a long and quiet life after the war, passing away on January 3, 2009. Yet the legacy he forged in just 4 days on a remote Pacific island continues to echo through military history. His actions on Guadalcanal were a catalyst, a single undeniable data point that forced a reluctant military bureaucracy to reevaluate its fundamental doctrine. The U.S. Army, with its focus on mass-produced weaponry and standardized training, had entered the war with a conspicuous blind spot: the value of the highly trained specialist marksman. George's performance was the irrefutable proof of concept. These ad hoc units prove their worth time and again, demonstrating an outsized impact on the battlefield by targeting enemy officers, machine gun crews, and forward observers. The lessons were not forgotten. In the post-war era, the U.S. Army formally established its own sniper schools, building a curriculum that drew directly on the principles that George had demonstrated: patience, fieldcraft, marksmanship, and the psychological mastery of the battlefield. The lone hunter, once an afterthought in the grand strategy of industrial warfare, became an institutionalized and indispensable asset. His book, Shots Fired in Anger, played a vital role in this evolution. It became required reading for generations of snipers, offering a direct link back to the raw, unfiltered experiences of one of the craft's modern pioneers. It provided not just the how, but the why, explaining the thought process behind every decision in his deadly duel. It served as a foundational text, preserving the ethos of the sniper as a thinking soldier, a tactician who fights not just with his rifle, but with his intellect. The physical embodiment of his legacy, his Winchester Model 70, also survived. The rifle that had been mocked as a mail-order toy became a celebrated artifact. It was more than just a piece of wood and steel. It was a symbol of a crucial idea, that sometimes the best tool for a job isn't the one that is issued, but the one that is mastered. The rifle eventually found a place of honor in the National Firearms Museum, a testament to the extraordinary achievements of its owner. There, it stands as a silent witness to the 4 days when the tide of a battle was turned not by a division or a bombing raid, but by one man's deep understanding of his craft. John George's story is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped by individuals who see a problem differently. He faced a challenge that had stumped a modern army and solved it with a civilian skill set and a personal tool. He was the right man, with the right rifle, at the right time. He was not just a soldier. He was a master of an art form, and his battlefield was a canvas where precision and patience became weapons of war. The story of John George and his Winchester Model 70 transcends the simple narrative of a successful military engagement. It is a timeless illustration of the eternal tension between the institution and the individual, between standardized doctrine and individual expertise. In the crucible of Guadalcanal, the U.S. Army's doctrine of overwhelming firepower, embodied by the M1 Garand, had met its match. The problem was not that the doctrine was wrong, but that it was incomplete. It failed to account for a type of warfare that was ancient and deeply personal, the art of the single, well-aimed shot. The 11 Japanese snipers had exploited this doctrinal gap with lethal efficiency. They had used the precision of the individual to neutralize the power of the mass. They had proven that a small number of skilled specialists could project an influence far greater than their numbers would suggest, capable of halting an entire regiment through the calculated application of fear and attrition. It was a lesson in asymmetrical warfare, taught long before the term became commonplace. Into this deadlock stepped John George, a man who was, in a sense, the mirror image of his opponents. He was an individual specialist in an army that prized the interchangeable infantryman. His skills were not the product of a military training manual, but of years of personal dedication to the discipline of marksmanship. His weapon was not a product of a government arsenal, but a personal possession, an extension of his own expertise. The duel that unfolded was therefore more than a clash between an American and Japanese soldiers. It was a contest between two competing philosophies of war, both centered on the power of the individual marksman. George's victory was a profound validation of the specialist. He demonstrated that in the complex tapestry of modern combat there is an irreplaceable role for the artist, the master craftsman, alongside the assembly line soldier. He proved that adaptability and individual skill could triumph where rigid, one-size-fits-all tactics had failed. His legacy is not merely in the number of enemies he defeated or the sniper program he helped to create. It is in the enduring principle that human ingenuity and expertise are the ultimate weapons. Technology, logistics, and numbers are all critical components of victory, but they are multipliers of human skill, not replacements for it. The image of a lone lieutenant slipping into the jungle with his polished sporting rifle, to succeed where thousands had failed, serves as a powerful testament to this truth. It is a story of how one man's quiet mastery of his craft spoke louder than the thunder of artillery, and how a single, well-placed shot can change the course of history.